Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. When we think of an Indian election, a very specific, super vivid scene usually pops right into our heads, doesn't it? We picture these massive, sprawling open grounds, just completely packed with thousands of cheering people. It's an absolute visual spectacle, carrying this incredible, infectious festival-like atmosphere. It's a literal celebration of the world's largest democracy. But, right behind those loud loudspeakers, the flying colors, and the cheering crowds, there is a staggering, invisible cost being paid. Today, we're going to look closely at the data and field reports from environmental scientists to uncover the massive ecological destruction hiding in plain sight during these democratic festivals.
Okay, let's dive into this with a really fascinating, yet pretty alarming contradiction. Picture a star politician flying into a rally. Their campaign helicopter lands on the helipad, they step out, and maybe they deliver a stirring 20-minute speech all about protecting our future and the environment. But here's what we usually totally miss. For those entire 20 minutes, for security and operational reasons, that helicopter's engine is almost always left idling. The blades just keep spinning, and according to investigative reports, in just that brief 20-minute window, that single idling helicopter pumps out the exact same amount of pollution as 40 cars sitting completely stalled in a heavy traffic jam. The damage is literally done in the exact same time it took to give a speech about saving the planet.
Now that's just one single helicopter. What happens when we zoom out to the ground level across the entire country? For a month straight, campaign vehicles roam every street, every little alleyway, from morning until night without taking a break. Our sources reveal that during a standard 30-day campaign period, the combined fleet of ground vehicles emits a mind-boggling 660 million kilograms of carbon dioxide. To put that massive number into perspective for you, nature would require roughly 20 million fully grown trees just to absorb that specific amount of pollution back out of the atmosphere. And remember, that staggering amount of CO2 is being generated in just 30 days.
Now, our environment actually has a natural baseline capacity to slowly absorb a steady stream of carbon. But when you dump millions of tons of CO2 into the air over a mere few weeks, you create what scientists call a carbon shock. It's basically a massive system overload. Our oceans and our trees simply cannot balance out this sudden, violent burst of carbon. As a result, the excess CO2 isn't absorbed at all. It remains trapped in our atmosphere for decades, actively accelerating global warming. Let's move from the crowded ground back up to the sky. To avoid the very traffic jams their own campaigns create, star campaigners frequently use private jets. Now, you might be thinking, well, there are millions of cars and only a few jets. How much damage could they really do? But we have to look at the sheer inefficiency here. A private jet burns so much fuel just to move one or two VIPs that it emits roughly 14 times more CO2 per passenger mile compared to a standard commercial flight. In a commercial plane, the carbon cost is split among hundreds of people. In a private jet, it's a massive atmospheric toll for just a tiny handful of individuals. But the real danger of these private jets isn't just the sheer amount of fuel they burn, it's actually the altitude at which they burn it. When a private jet flies at 30,000 feet, the air outside is freezing, like well below 0 degrees. Meanwhile, the exhaust blasting out of the jet's engines is incredibly hot. When that extreme heat hits that extreme cold, it instantly freezes, creating ice crystals. These are called contrails. You've definitely seen them, those long white lines trailing behind jets high up in the sky. Well, when atmospheric conditions are just right, these white lines spread out and form what are known as cirrus clouds.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core problem. Think about a car parked in the hot summer sun, with all its windows rolled up tight. The heat from the sun gets in, but it can't escape. That is exactly what these artificial cirrus clouds do to the Earth. They allow the sun's heat to enter during the day, but at night, they act like a heavy, suffocating blanket, preventing that heat from radiating back out into space. This high-altitude thermal blanket warms the climate far faster than ground-level pollution does.
Okay, we've seen the damage up in the atmosphere, but let's bring our focus back down to the soil. The moment a leader steps off that jet, they are greeted by miles and miles of giant cutouts, massive hoardings, and brightly colored campaign banners. It looks visually spectacular, doesn't it? It's really the defining aesthetic of an election. But this intense visual pollution is actually the very beginning of a severe, toxic nightmare for the local environment.
Because you see, these aren't just innocent pieces of cloth blowing in the wind. These massive campaign banners are manufactured using a highly toxic chemical cocktail. The base material is polyvinyl chloride, or PVC flex. But to make them super shiny and to ensure those bright political colors don't fade in the harsh sun, manufacturers add heavy metals like lead. And to make absolutely sure the giant banners can bend and fold in the wind without snapping, they mix in chemicals called phthalates.
The real danger activates when these banners are left out in the elements for weeks or even months.
Imagine a normal tea bag. You dip it in hot water and the tea extracts right into your cup. The exact same thing happens here. When these chemical-laced PVC banners bake in the scorching sun and then a heavy rainstorm hits, the water washes over the plastic. The rain acts just like hot water on a tea bag, steeping those toxic chemicals right out of the plastic and washing them straight down into the soil. This toxic runoff is completely disastrous. The phthalates that leach into the soil and eventually into our groundwater are known as endocrine disruptors. Once they enter our drinking water and we consume them, these chemicals literally mimic human hormones. They hijack our body's internal messaging system, leading to severe health issues including cancer and reproductive problems. Meanwhile, the lead that washes off these colorful banners is a notorious neurotoxin which severely damages brain development in children. All of this is silently seeping into the water supply while the rally goes on right above it.
And then, of course, there's the crowd themselves. At a rally of 100,000 people, you obviously need to provide drinking water. This results in the distribution of millions of single-use plastic water bottles, water packets, and plastic glasses. Once the rally is over, the ground is transformed into an absolute sea of plastic garbage. And the terrifying reality here is that a single plastic bottle, one you might drink from for just 5 minutes during a speech, will take a minimum of 400 years to break down in the environment. It will outlive your great-great-grandchildren.
And the journey of that plastic is deeply, uncomfortably intimate to our own health. Over the months, the sun bakes those discarded bottles left in the fields, making them super brittle. They crack and splinter into tiny, invisible pieces, known as microplastics. The rain then washes these microplastics into nearby streams and lakes. Fish swallow these microscopic shards of plastic, and eventually those very same fish are caught, cooked, and served right back onto our dinner plates. The pollution from the rally ground literally ends up inside our bodies.
So, the crucial point is, what happens to the thousands of tons of garbage that municipalities actually do manage to sweep up? Well, they take it to the dumping yards. But here is the fatal flaw in the entire system. PVC banners cannot be recycled. Those millions of cheap plastic glasses, often not recycled either. So, to quickly clear the space, authorities and dumping yard managers rely on the absolute cheapest, fastest method available. They set the massive piles of plastic and PVC completely on fire. And this burning triggers a horrific chemical chain reaction. When PVC is set on fire, it releases pure chlorine gas into the air. This chlorine violently mixes with naturally occurring airborne hydrogen, creating an entirely new compound, hydrogen chloride. As this gas floats up and hits the moisture in the clouds, it turns highly acidic. When it finally rains, it falls as acid rain, hitting the surrounding agricultural lands, destroying the natural fertility of the soil, and entirely ruining crops.
But as bad as it is, acid rain actually isn't the most frightening thing to come out of those fires. The thick, black smoke billowing off burning plastics contains a class of chemicals called dioxins. Dioxins are what scientists call forever chemicals. They are unbelievably toxic, and nature basically has no mechanism to break them down. Once they're released into the environment, they are there to stay, for good.
Let's trace how these forever chemicals create a silent pandemic. The toxic black smoke rises from the burning PVC and eventually settles right onto the grass and surrounding pastures. Livestock, like cows and buffaloes, graze on this contaminated grass. Because dioxins don't break down, they accumulate in the fatty tissues of the animals. Finally, these potent toxins are passed directly to humans when we consume the milk or the meat of those animals. A simple 2-week political campaign actively injects forever chemicals into the local food chain for generations to come.
Looking at this staggering scale of destruction, from the upper atmosphere all the way down to the milk in our glass, we have to ask an incredibly obvious question. Why is this allowed to happen? The Election Commission is the single most powerful body during this time. Do they not know the extent of this environmental devastation? The simple truth is, they know exactly what is happening. Before elections, the Election Commission officially issues green guidelines, explicitly advising political parties to avoid single-use plastics and to opt for eco-friendly campaign materials. However, there is a massive, glaring loophole. These guidelines are entirely advisory. They are completely toothless. There is no strict legal enforcement. If a politician blankets an entire city in toxic PVC, there are no heavy fines, and most importantly, their political nomination is absolutely not canceled. Because the law is so weak, we are left with a stark economic and political conflict. On one side, you have environmental responsibility, using traditional cloth banners. But cloth is expensive, the colors fade in the rain, and let's face it, it doesn't look quite as vibrant. On the other side, you have political visibility and budget constraints. PVC is incredibly cheap to buy in massive bulk, and it looks super shiny and impressive to the voters. When forced to choose, politicians consistently prioritize their immediate visibility and budget over the long-term health of the environment. And this brings us to a really heartbreaking paradox. The Festival of Democracy is a beautiful thing, right? It connects leaders directly with the public. But the way we currently run it means we are basically trading a few weeks of political celebration for literal centuries of severe environmental punishment. We are permanently sacrificing our land, our air, and our water just to get through a 30-day election cycle.
But you know, the data we've looked at today actually points us toward a very clear, highly actionable solution. Right now, the Election Commission rigorously tracks campaign finance. For transparency, every single candidate must account for every penny they spend. If we can audit their financial footprint with that level of precision, why on earth can't we audit their ecological footprint?
Let's move to and see how this builds. Imagine how a real ecological audit would actually work for a candidate. Alongside their financial receipts, they must declare the exact kilograms of PVC flex they deployed in their district. They must log the sheer number of single-use plastic bottles their rallies distributed to the crowds. They must account for the carbon emissions from every single private jet trip they took. We make the invisible damage totally visible, quantifiable, and trackable.
And here's where we finally give the law some teeth. What if we establish a strict ecological ceiling? A quote that researchers are actively pushing for is this: cancel the nomination if the ecological damage crosses the limit. Think about it. Just as a candidate can be disqualified for overspending their financial budget or engaging in corruption, they should be immediately disqualified if their campaign unleashes a catastrophic amount of toxic pollution onto the very citizens they are asking to vote for them.
It is for sure a radical idea, but facing down centuries of acid rain, microplastics in our bodies, and carbon shocks requires radical action. Because ultimately, what good is winning the right to govern if the land you are governing is completely poisoned in the process? To truly save and celebrate our democracy, we might first need to save the environment it runs on. Thank you so much for joining me on today's Explainer. I really hope this changes how you view the next election rally in your town. See you next time.